I'm Adrienne Enns, and I welcome you to the Intention Sessions podcast. I want to inspire our most intentional living. In each episode, we'll talk to remarkable individuals who will share their authentic journeys and their insights with us. They're going to remind us that life's complexities can be our greatest teachers, and that intentional living can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. I hope you find some inspiration for your most intentional life right here. Today on the podcast, we have Karla Smith. Karla is a personal transformational coach. She's a speaker, she's a writer, she's a blogger, and she's an optimism expert, dedicated to guiding people to courageously choose to live a life of their own creation. So Karla and I met a few years ago. We are fellow entrepreneurs, we are neighbors, we are now friends. And Karla, I'm going to share the story of, how touched I have been by your life, and I want everybody to hear it. Karla recently invited me to her wedding. And it was the second marriage for her and her husband. And they're bringing together this beautiful mixed family, and it was such a celebration of love and gratitude and awesome dancing. And I was just so grateful to be there because it really exemplified for me, for all the times in my life where I've talked myself out of things and been like, we can't do this because of XYZ. This experience was just like, love can conquer all, and I know things haven't always been perfect and easy, so I have no delusions about that, but it was just this beautiful example of people all really wanting to create a beautiful relationship of love. So Karla, that's how I picture you, and I welcome you, and I thank you for being here today.
I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for that beautiful introduction and for being part of our celebration and being my friend.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So I want to start. We have lots to cover off today because you've always been doing incredible work. And then recently you've been called to talk a lot about the racial issues and allyship and how we can be intentional. So we want to cover off all of this because I think it's really valuable for people to hear your perspective and what you have to say. But the first thing I want to start with is you do a lot of work around optimism. And when I was thinking about this, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I feel like sometimes when we do this work, whether it's about optimism or joy or being intentional, people have this idea that we're just happy all the time and nothing bad has ever happened. So I want you to give us the straight goods about what optimism means to you and your message to share with people about it.
Yeah, thank you. It's so true that when you have this work that you do that is really about bringing optimism to the world, that people then think you're like happy pants, And I definitely have moments of not being happy pants, but I definitely know to always move back to that, right? So optimism for me is a simple definition. It means that generally and permanently we're in a good space, and that temporarily and specifically we have challenge in our life. And then opposite to that, pessimism is the opposite, that generally and permanently we think our life is really challenging, and permanently and generally we think good things are happening. And so it allows, when you have that as your definition, it allows you then to always return to hope, right? To know that things are not lasting forever, and that really to find the gratitude and joy and the intention in the part where it's good, so that you live mostly in that place, and that you have that always to hold on to, right? And so for me, I hope that as I continue to teach that message and share it and live it, that I'm encouraging more and more of the world to have a hopeful and optimistic view of their lives and our lives as a collective, really.
It's amazing. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share, what led you to this point? Because a lot of times we're teaching what we need to learn. So I imagine you've had to learn optimism.
Right. It's so true. And so, my story starts as a really little person. I grew up in a house where I witnessed and experienced a lot of abuse, physical, emotional, drug and alcohol abuse. And it was really painful and it was difficult. And I learned how to navigate it. I was groomed to be very people pleasing and very helpful all the time. And as I got older and older, I looked for those people in my life, of course, to so that I could be comfortable, as we do, right? And so I ended up really losing myself. I feel like by my teen years, I was definitely just always looking to make other people happy and make other people feel good, and even at the cost of myself. And then I ended up in my late teens and into my 20s meeting a man who, at the time it felt like I got to get out of this abuse, right? We both actually had some of that in our lives. And so we were really drawn to each other to move away from what felt like such dysfunction. And we have a beautiful family. We have 4 gorgeous kids that we had, but I just kept getting lost in that. I got lost in motherhood. I got lost in volunteering. I got lost in being a wife. I just got lost. And the more and more I got lost, I became resentful, and I ended up getting really depressed, but really functional, right? Because I'm the mom of 4, and on the outside everything looks really great. We are the coach and managers of all the teams, and we're on the parent council, and there was this veneer that was so deep and so yeah, it was potent. I couldn't let it go because it just served me needing to be needed. And so I ended up eventually just falling to pieces, knowing that I didn't know, well, not knowing whether I wanted to live or die, really getting to this place that was so dark and so sad. And when I came out of that, I had a really, really dark day, and made the decision to live. And I think in that moment, along with some divine intervention, I feel as though I chose living. And it was like the first time I realized that I had choice about how I lived my life. Really, it was like a wake up, like, so even though it was so devastating and hard and uncomfortable, and obviously, it was a really scary day, on the other side of it, I realized I had choice. And so I had the choice to be living or not living. I had the choice to be angry or not angry. I had the choice to be married or not married. And I had the choice to be pessimistic about my life or optimistic. And so, with really, really baby steps, like really baby and quite haphazard steps, I can't say they were planned in any way, through lots of different things, professional help, really beautiful people, family and friends who supported me, along with so much, like I was like a researchaholic on how to live a life that felt like the life I wanted to live, where I was thriving instead of existing. And so I just kept learning new things to do and try and be so that I could feel elevated instead of in this depressed state. And so that's how optimism was born for me, is really by making the choice every day, and to do things that really lifted me up, and so yeah, I feel like it definitely comes from a dark place. And I think that's why it's so big for me, because I know that I know what it's like to be on the other side of optimism and feel
It's
hopeless.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to punctuate that choice, right? Because it's
Mhm.
also like you make the choice once, but then
Mhm.
you make it every day,
Ex-
So optimism is something that you're choosing all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. I always
And
say it. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say before I dive into my next question, that was the
Mhm.
other thing that was so beautiful about that day that I got to share with you and your family
Mhm.
is that I could just cry thinking about it, but your
Mhm.
kids are just so beautiful and full of life. And
Mhm.
they were just so happy to see you happy.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think there's two things that I like. Optimism, like you said, I call it a practice. And for me, it's my lifelong work, right? Like it's not something that, like you said, you do once or you learn and then it just stays with you. We have to put work into that. So, and that's why I love the work you do, because it is intentional, it's conscious and mindful, and we have to do that every day. And so that's what I teach all the time, is that this isn't just a one-off, choice. And then the other thing is that the incredible thing that happens, as you know, is that then your kids see it and they start living that way too, right? Because they're such great sponges, and we're such great models. No matter what we do, they're learning from us, right? So it feels beautiful to be teaching them this, and for them to be seeing it, and then to see them do it is like one of the biggest joys of my life.
It's incredible. And I would love, if you don't mind, it's always so interesting for everybody to hear, just different practices because they become just so personal. And I'm always trying to illustrate that different things, work for different people. But I know that you have a very committed, regular daily practice. Do you mind sharing with us what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Yeah. So my daily practice was birthed out of that sort of time when I was just trying new things. And the very first thing I did, and I continue to do every day, was drink water with like warm water with lemon. And I chose it because it's super easy and I could make it happen. Right. And so but what happened is I started to learn presence, like how to be present, right? Because I would like squeeze the lemon and really take the time to smell it, and pour the water and be so grateful that water could come out of my tap, and then really feel the water going down my throat at every gulp. So I became really present in that 30 seconds, and that helped me then to want to cultivate being present more and more. And so I added then meditation, which I have about a 20-minute practice. I do a lot of guided meditation, but also do a meditation called metta meditation, which is a Buddhist gratitude prayer, basically, that sends love, ripples love out from me and then to my loved ones, and then into my larger community, and then globally. And so I do that every morning. I have about 50 affirmations that I say every day, which I definitely didn't start with 50. I started with one or two, and they've just grown, and it feels like it's almost, again, a prayer to myself about how beautiful I've become, right? And how much I love myself, which feels amazing. I have a gratitude journal as well that I write in every day. And then I have a reflective journal that I write in too, which has really just is I feel like, most transformative practice for me personally, because it's where I really saw my shifts happen, because there's something so magical about a pen and paper that gets you to reflect so clearly on where you are, how you're treating yourself, and then how you can move forward. So I think those are my key ones for sure.
It's amazing. And so you can answer this either personally if you want, but I know as a coach you also see lots of people come through your practice. What is the biggest, like what do you do on the really tough days? Or if you want to speak to like what you see generally, like what are the biggest obstacles that you find people come up against in these intentional practices?
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that consistency makes a really big difference, right? And so being consistent is obviously the hardest thing because we sabotage ourselves all the time. So, uh, especially when we're not sure yet how we feel about ourselves. So our inner critic gets in the way and it like wants to keep us safe and small. So we don't want to like start seeing ourselves as with all the possibilities ahead of us, right? Uncertainty is such a huge part of people's fear as well, just not knowing if it's going to work, what it's going to feel like, to change pieces of your life. So we deal a lot with uncertainty, and I think the other piece that's was really big for me is really, and this is such a big topic, but really just being able to love myself, right? And so that
Hmm.
gets in the way, of course, right? Not knowing if I love myself. I didn't love myself. And so that like that lack of self-worth and lack of deservedness and doubt all played such a huge part in me having to start and then restart and restart and restart until it sort of flourished into a more solid practice. That's why I always say it was haphazard at the beginning because it really was not a practice. It was like, I'm going to try this and I'm going to try this. And, I know,
I have a very wide smile right now. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I
yes, I
bet.
so get it.
Yeah, and it's still that way, right? Sometimes as we elevate, then new things come into our practice and they are challenging, right? And so we have to start and restart and find the courage, right? And be vulnerable, I think, too.
I think so. And yeah, or something that you think you may have dealt with, you're like, oh, here
Mhm.
that comes again. And there's another layer to it.
Exactly, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
What advice would you offer for somebody who's just like really at that starting stage? Like
Mhm.
who, the idea, and you and I have both been there, where it's like this idea of loving ourselves is actually brand new. We're like, oh, I didn't know I could actually be on my own side. I didn't know I could befriend myself. Like, where would you suggest that person starts?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is that you start with something that floats your boat, like that you really feel connected to, right? So I and then you start as small as you can possibly imagine so that you can't fail at it. So if you want to bring exercise into your life because movement really matters to you so much and you know that it's going to make you feel energized and you've always wanted to have a movement practice, then literally walk upstairs or even walk around your house or take a walk around the block instead of thinking that you need to do the hour, you know, whatever, like whatever, in even a yoga class or whatever. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. Start extremely small and celebrate yourself, like celebrate that you did the really small thing, and those celebrations are also, that's contagious for us. We love to feel like we're doing a good job, right? So the more and more we can be successful, the more we're going to try it, and then you just add to it slowly. So I think it's that, not thinking you have to do all or nothing, and being gradual and being gentle and compassionate with yourself.
I love the way you said it, and to me it ties back to what you said about presence right at the beginning. So let's say it is walking up the stairs, also
Mhm,
being present, just noticing how it
mhm,
feels, this sense of
mhm,
accomplishment,
mhm.
quieting that inner critic who's like, this is too small. Because I'm with you, I talk to a lot of people who, want the big thing and then they end up doing nothing. And I'm always like, just do
Mhm.
something. And to your point,
Right.
like have it be joyful and
Mhm.
celebrate it. And
Mhm.
just these are the moments that add up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, and I know this is true for you too, because we've talked about this before, but just like that's how I have a daily practice now, but it really feels like this, it was a gradual journey that I didn't really pay attention to until I knew that I was doing things differently, but I didn't call it a daily practice for a really long time. It was just these pieces that I was adding in that felt so much better than not adding them in.
I totally agree. Sometimes when people ask, I actually don't have an answer because I'm like, it did feel so small. It was, and to
Mm,
your point, I was very fragile. So it's just like, okay, I
mm,
just have to do one little thing, just keep
mm.
nudging myself forward and being like, I'm okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it often starts when you need this, it often starts in that fragile space, right? Where we just need to find the little thing that's going to help us just turn on that part of us that loves us deeply, right? And start to amplify that voice that gets drowned out.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
I just love your choice of words because the other thing, and I want to shift the conversation a little bit to what's going on in the world and just
Mhm.
your use right now of the word or phrase a fragile space.
Yeah.
I know I had you come on to the membership. I know that you've been on a number of panels, and with all of the racial issues and racial tension, we're trying to navigate forward in a really intentional and mindful way. So, I'd love for you to share what you've been sharing and also just to give listeners some context of your own racial background and because you bring such an interesting perspective to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, yeah, and so I'm biracial. My dad is white and my mom is black, and I grew up in Toronto, and so have really known racism my whole life, but also had the privilege of having the patriarchal person in our family be white. So there was privilege and also not privilege, and so I've been saying lately, like, I'm not sure where I belonged as I grew up because I didn't really belong in either group. And that's part of this discussion that we're all having and learning and unlearning, right? Is that
Hmm.
there were times when I was definitely Black, and there were times where I wasn't Black enough. And so, just really, and having to then navigate that as a young person, what that does to your self esteem and worth, and just what community you belong to. So I struggled with that a lot, especially in high school. I ended up marrying a Black man, and we have 4 kids, and as I shared, and our daughter is eldest, and then we have 3 boys. And so that experiencing racism through my ex-husband's eyes, and also personally with him, we had lots of things happen to us that were around race, as well as then having to prepare our boys from the time our oldest was 12 to really understand how to be safe, especially in the evenings, but around police, and around just how to really understand that your skin has meaning. That's not fair, but is the truth, right? And so that was really challenging. And then, as you mentioned, I got married this year, and I've married a white man who has 3 beautiful kids, and so we call ourselves the mixed nine, and
I
we are
love it.
right. We're very blended for sure. And so then we are also navigating, especially right now, that, right? Because we have very different experiences. The boys have very different experiences growing up, and then have some similarities because they played basketball, all of them. So have these really core things that are the same, and then other things that are really different. So I feel like I have this unique space that I'm in, that has, and then on top of it, my platforms that I sort of am part of and that I have some role in are predominantly wholehearted white women. And so I just feel like I have this opportunity, and I was really drawn to being able to meet people where they are and really lean in and help people to come to the conversation, because I really understood and understand that it's a really difficult conversation to have because we don't talk about it ever, right? So that's really where I find myself right now, and it's been a very interesting journey for sure. It's a fast 4 weeks.
It's very fast 4 weeks. And so, in the spirit of that, and in being intentional, like, how can, like, all of us, so assuming anybody could be listening, and so I'm asking you to
Yeah.
give like advice to the world. Like, what have you been sharing, and how can people show up and
Yeah.
and also in a truthful and authentic and well-meaning and also curious way, because a
Yeah.
lot of us are also, we want to have conversations.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is to find myself on conversations with, obviously a mix of cultures and races on calls, and being really mindful of talking to everyone in a generalized way. So that's like my number one thing right now, is to be kind of specific.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. And
Or
so,
yeah, I guess that's the other
yeah.
question. Like, can we talk to people in a generalized way? Like,
Right. I don't know about race. Like, because we're specifically talking about race, it's a really good question. And I've been sort of thinking about it because I've been hosting these conversations. And, I don't want to say we all need to do this, because if there's Black people on the call, they don't need to, figure out their white privilege. Right. Do you know what I mean?
right.
So just figuring out how to really be nuanced in my language has been a really wonderful thing. But so what I want to say right off the top really is I've kind of just figured out that if we look at this like a marathon instead of, so just as a marathon. So at the beginning of a marathon, everyone's like sprinting out the gates, trying to get to their position, right? And so I feel like that's kind of what happened right after George Floyd's video was released, and we were all just outraged and, you know, working on trying not to be shocked anymore for some people. And also yeah, just it was like it got teeth, the movement got teeth. And so everyone just felt like, especially Black people, I think we all felt like as though we couldn't take our foot off the pedal because we were so worried it would go away, because so many times it has gone away, right? The movement piece, the part where there's allyship, because there's no way for this to work if it's not like, to that point, a generalized collective pushing this agenda of changing systemic racism. So, but I realize now that I'm getting to a place where I'm now in the pace piece, right? So once you get past that, like I've jockeyed for a position where I'm gonna, what is my role going to be? Now my job is to do this. It feels to me like it's gonna be, my goal is that my grandkids don't have to have the same talks that I've had to give my sons, right? That when I have grandkids,
Mm,
they don't have to have that chat. So that might be 5 years from now. That might be 10 years from now. I'm not sure, but I'm in it to make that change, right? That's my
yeah.
commitment. And, um, and so I feel really comfortable in my pace right now, do you know? And the other thing about a marathon that's really important, I think, is that they let the elite runners go first, right? And so I am looking to those people who have been in this activism for decades and have so much knowledge and have paved the way. They have all the information. They know how things can change because they've been working on this for decades. And so I'm learning from them and then taking that information and then sharing it. So I feel like all of us get to be a teacher and a student through this, right? And that's where I feel like we get to meet each other, right? And then maybe I share something and then someone's taking that and then going back and talking to their brother-in-law or their kid or the teacher at their school and teaching them something, and then so on and so forth. And that's how it ripples. So that's my optimistic hope for the movement.
It's remarkable. And like, so for people listening, and again, we don't know where people are in their frame of mind, but most people here are listening because they're interested in intentional living and
Mm-hmm.
being inspired. And, where can people start?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first thing we have to do is start including race in our conversations. So not being afraid to say really sort of um, direct things, like saying phrases like white privilege and white supremacy and anti-black racism um, and Black Lives Matter and systemic racism and racial bias. Like we have to start. That has to become part of our everyday lives. So the first place to start is, if that isn't natural for you yet, learning what all of that means and really having a clear understanding about where you fit into that, right? So understanding. So I'm doing lots of work on that for myself, and that work for me is totally different than it would be for you, Adrian, right? So
Hmm.
just really learning. So that's a huge piece, right? Learning, and then listening to Black people because they really know how to make this better, right? Because they're the ones who felt oppressed for a really long time. So really listening, especially those voices, the people have been doing this work for a long time. So one of the easiest things you can do is, if you're on Instagram or if you're on or a podcast or Facebook, is start adding Black voices onto your news feed, into your Instagram friend list, so that you're starting to hear things differently, right? So it's just automatically shifting what information you're getting. You're getting a broader story. So that's like an easy first step, for example. That's two first steps. Sorry.
I think one of the important words, and just speaking for myself personally, and from what you just said, has been the listening. So
Mhm.
just to people in my life, listening to podcasts,
Mhm.
and yeah, just really being open, because we always do want to compare things to our own experience. I think it's just a
Mhm.
natural tendency. So to listen without comparison.
Yeah, I think listening is such a beautiful practice. Like to cultivate listening is such a beautiful thing in us as human beings, right? The more we cultivate listening, the more connection we have with each other. So, in this particular instance around racial injustice, listening to people who have the experience allows you to have so much more compassion, understanding, acceptance, and then want to make change, because how can you not if you've truly listened, right? So, yeah, listening is a really beautiful and an integral part of this for sure.
Absolutely. And then going back to what you were saying earlier about, the marathon, and even
Mhm.
earlier in our conversation about consistency, because you're
Mhm.
right. Like this has been going on I was watching some comedian last night, and he was quoting someone, and he was like, "Oh, this has been going on for decades." He goes, "Yes, decades since the decade of zero." Like he was like, "This has been going on and on." So, yeah, it really demands like consistent
Mhm.
listening and commitment to change,
Mhm.
almost like our intention practice on good days, bad days, yeah, when we're seeing all kinds of, flurry of activity. And then when we're not, being in it for the marathon.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in terms of being an ally, that means that you really start to change the way you show up uh, in your business, in your personal life, at your school, because the only thing we can do is really change systemic parts of this. Institutions need to change. And so we have to spend our dollars differently. We have to tell publishers that we want different voices, not just the same, you know. We want our kids to read books that have all different cultures in them. We want, and that demand that, right? And we want politicians to this to be always at one of their issues that they're dealing with, right? So, all of these things, we need to change this judicially. We need to change it in housing. We need to change it in education. We need to change it in food scarcity and poverty. There's just so many places where racial injustice, and especially around Black and Indigenous and people of color in Canada, are really oppressed, right? And we need to all work together. There's no way for it not to be a big collective solution, right? That's the only way that it gets solved. So, yeah, it is about consistency and figuring out what you can do, not just for a month.
Yeah, and I know of a number of resources that I've drawn on, and I imagine some are the same as the ones you are drawing on, but we will pool our resources for the show notes to give everybody a great cross section of places to access and get information.
That sounds
Does that
great.
sound good to you?
Yeah, perfect. I love that. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. And then I'm just really curious because you and I are female of certain age group. I'm
Mhm.
curious about your boys, like, so they're like late teens, 20s.
Mhm.
um what are they saying, like, because they're a different generation, right? I'm curious
Mhm.
what they're saying, what they're experiencing. Do
Mhm.
they feel optimistic? Are they frustrated? Like,
Yeah.
what's that conversation at your dinner table?
Yeah, it's amazing. My boys range from almost 17 to 23. And they've all had been carded or stopped by police, each of them, which they have all now told me. They never told me because they knew I'd never let them out of the house, I think, you know. And so they've
Yeah.
all shared, which is not funny, but it's funny to us because they know me well. But I
Yeah,
just,
that's the only reason
right?
I'm not laughing at their experience.
I know,
No.
totally. Right. And, one of my sons, his first experience was at 13. And when he told me that last week or 2 weeks ago, and it broke my heart that for 7 years, that's been like a piece of him that he couldn't let out because of fear and of, what might be his life if he was to acknowledge that. But what's amazing is that even though they've all had, really not positive things happen with police, and they've seen it with their dad and their uncle, they are so, like, just drawn to be making change. Like, they're just drawn to it. And so they've each done incredible things in the last month. I think it's amazing to watch this generation have their first opportunity to be activists. We've seen this in the States with kids against gun control, and in the Me Too movement. And I think for Black kids, this has become like their opportunity to really stand out in a new way. And so to watch them, and I think with social media and just the way they can reach people globally, it's a totally different platform, right? They have such a broad way to connect, and they can be connected to so many people. So they feel united, and that's really cool to see. And so one of my sons has created a petition for his university, and through that work has since started a Black student association at that university. Has had the dean personally let him know that they're changing all their policies and putting action into place at that university. They were like 40,000 signatures on his petition. It's pretty amazing that when he was a quiet, there wasn't really, you wouldn't have known this could come out of him, do you know? And my other
Yeah.
son, who's creative and he's a rapper and has a music production company, has made this incredibly vulnerable and beautiful video with his brothers to portray what it feels like to be a Black man in Toronto, a young man in Toronto, and just amazing to see their creativity and and also hear their voice. They're so clear and so good at using their voices, which is, as you said, we're women of an age where that was not really what we were taught. And so to watch my kids, my daughter, she, wrote this beautiful, vulnerable post around what it was like for her to be in a mostly white high school and share her, like, these things and feel finally like she could let it out, because there is a feeling right now that you can speak your truth, right? Which really feels different. Before, there was all of this sort of, you're a angry Black woman, or you're too aggressive or whatever. And now really there's this space for us to share our anger or frustration. And so that feels, I think, for them really freeing, which is really nice.
It's incredible. I just, and we said this before we even started recording, like, we don't like the circumstances, but the
Mm,
fact that, these situations have sparked
mhm,
real activism and truth and rawness and beauty and conversations. And I know I'm having conversations with my own kids, like
mhm,
this generation. Yeah, their creativity and innovation makes me extremely hopeful. Like, I'm just like,
mhm.
you guys just keep going and going and going. Like, this is like, we're here and we're doing our part, but they're the future.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And they're also just, they're so good at using what is in front of them as a vehicle to move the needle. And I think that's so powerful. And things spread so fast. It's amazing, right? You
It
know,
is amazing, and I didn't know all of the stories that you shared, so I'm glad that you did share them all. But for your son, I remember when you shared the petition, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know he when he started it, a lot of this unfolded in just a matter of hours.
it did. Exactly. I think people were hungry to make a difference, right? And I think that's the beauty. My son is innovative and came up with and creative and wrote this amazing petition. But it was on that day when he wrote it, he put it into our group chat and there were 8 signatures on it. He said, do you mind signing it? I don't know what it does. I don't know what's going to happen, but would you sign and share? And we're all like, sure, sure, done. And then by 7 or no, so it went, that was around 7 p.m. And by 10 p.m., there were like 34 signatures, and the university had already reached out to him and given him a seat on this board. And by the end of the week, there's 37,000 people on it. And I think what's so powerful about that and magical about what's possible, and this is where my optimism is that yes, one person came up with the idea, but 37,000 people acted on that idea and made something happen, right? And so if we all do those very small acts, which goes back to what we were talking about, the small steps. You don't have to take giant steps. We need to do little things that make big differences. So that's the lesson that we learned from that petition. I think it's like it feels as though it should be the sort of roadmap for us all, that we can come follow the good ideas and then put energy into them because they happen, right? When we all do that together.
I love it. I was just thinking the same thing. It's like all of the simple things, because I've also had a few conversations, I mean, everybody's in their own place, right?
Mhm.
And some people can do a lot and some people can do a little. And
Mhm.
just that petition is a beautiful example of if you
Mhm.
can only do a little bit, it does make a
Mhm.
difference.
For
And if you
sure.
can do more, then great.
Yeah. And I guess just the one thing I want to say about that specifically just is because we need this to be a collective, we need it to be a collective energy. I feel like the most important thing that we can do is not keep this private. Like be public about not necessarily sharing what you're doing, but do things outside of just insular. It's not just about your own personal work. It's also about doing things in our community, in the collective, right? So that things actually expand. So yeah, sign the petitions, vote, use your vote, spend your money in specific, either in communities, small stores where you know that money is going directly into the hands of people who are creative and innovative and coming up with great ideas. Donate to the places that are doing the good work, right? So yeah, just be public about it so that it's not just your work inside. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good reminder, right?
Mhm.
Because it can be, there is a lot of information, so it could be
Exactly.
very easy to bury one's head and be buried for a very long time,
Yeah.
but yeah, like, and to never even, like, even then, there's no clear, okay, I'm done now,
Right.
it's,
Yes.
but to your point, like the action, like it's
Mhm.
taking all of these actions to show the collective support. I
Mhm.
really, really like that
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where
as
we
a
are right now.
reminder. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So what happens next? What if you were to close out this conversation with, you've already said so many inspirational things, so I don't feel that anything here is lacking, but I just admire your perspective so much because you're a unique blend of um, your lived experience. You're
Mhm.
also a coach and have done so much personal work. You also listen to a lot of people through your coaching practice, in the community, in your household. I just feel like you have a lot of insights that other people may not have access to. What words of wisdom or inspiration or kick in the pants do you want to impart?
Yeah, so really what I think, because we've talked about optimism, I am so hopeful. I'm hopeful for humanity, right? I really believe that as a as a human race, we can change things so much when we are intentional and we we go in our actions, right? And so I just feel as though we have to take chances and know that we're going to make mistakes and fumble and say the wrong thing and maybe offend someone. And then, like you said, listen and learn and unlearn and go at it again and not give up because it's a little bit difficult, right? We have to be in the discomfort of this because we know for sure, as a coach, my whole, like, the thing that I love and feel is such a privilege for me is that I get to watch people personally transform, like transform their lives. Like it's such magic to see someone go from feeling not joyful and feel like they're just existing and moving into this space where they love what they've chosen for themselves. And I think we get to do that as a human race as well, right? We can collectively move and transform this into something totally different. And so I just want us to be in that discomfort because that's where all the change is. That's where all the magic is, in that discomfort. And I'm not saying to be like excruciatingly uncomfortable, but like be in it and see that you can that it's okay to be there, that it's not the worst thing ever, because on the other side of that discomfort is harmony and peace and all of the things that we're looking for, equality, justice, and it's all possible when we all do it together. So make the mistakes and fumble through. Know that people are also going to make mistakes with you, and so be gentle and meet them where they are. And if we all lean in instead of lean out and feel like this is not our problem, or people have to get it by themselves, or all the things that are around judgment, uh, you know and instead just lean in with love, things are going to change. We can feel it. I know that everyone can feel it. And so we just have to be in that momentum of continually being consistent with it.
So beautifully said. And I also can feel the momentum. And like you, I am optimistic, hopeful, making a zillion mistakes and trying to learn.
Yeah.
And Karla, I hope you have like an open calendar, because I think a lot of people are going to want to reach out to you. So, how do people access your wisdom, whether it's social media, through coaching, your programs? Tell these people how they can work with you, learn from you, be part of your community.
Thank you so much. So, my website will be, I'm sure, on there. It's a really great place to learn a little more about me and my how I coach. And I offer always a complimentary session to those people who are ready to work on transformation for themselves, are ready to create their own vision. So, my website is kslifecoach.com. I also have a private Facebook group, which I love, called Dare to Shine. And we are there to really have conversations about showing up and shining in your life, professionally, personally, as a collective. And quite recently, I've started a series called Daring Conversations, which is all around racial justice, inclusion, equality, and having those conversations with each other. So those are weekly, which people are welcome to join within the group. And then I'm on Instagram as Karla Life Coach, where I love to share little bits of wisdom as well. And you can reach me
Little
at any
bits,
of those
yeah.
places as well. I'm happy to have
They're
a
more than
conversation
little
with
bits.
anyone. Yeah, thank you.
And yes, for anyone listening, I highly encourage you. The Dare to Shine group is incredible. The
Yeah.
conversations are incredible. And if you are looking for an amazing coach, I have not met a better one. So you're in good hands, Karla. I'm grateful for your friendship, as I tell you constantly. And I'm just grateful for your own, courage and willingness to just share so genuinely and teach us and be patient and have these conversations. It's a gift. It's a huge gift. And I'm very, very grateful.
I love you, and thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to share a little bit of my story, and for you being in my life and being my beautiful friend. And I love everything that we get to do together. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for listening. May some of the wisdom shared here inspire your most intentional living. For more information about this episode, this podcast, intentional living, and my work in the world, please visit mayyouknowjoy.com. You can also find my May You Know Joy and Seeds of Intention cards there, and my book, Intentional Days. You'll also find details for the Intentional Days membership, where you can gain access to a thriving community of intentional souls and lots of regular inspiration. I've got you covered. Until next time, I wish you great joy and many intentional days.